There we go. Fantastic. And for everyone who is catching this on the recording, you won't be able to see all the mouse movements, but other than that, and you won't be able to see the polls. So they don't transfer over to the recording. That's only for the folks who are here live. So make sure to attend the next one live. But other than that, you're going to get all the great info tonight. Okay, so it looks like we have quite a few juniors here tonight and sophomores. Good. That's who we should be talking to. And then quite a few younger folks tonight. Okay. Some parents getting ahead of it, getting the information early. I like that too. And we had more than 150 CDM families register for tonight. So I'm quite excited about that. With that said, we've got a lot to get through tonight. So I'm going to open this up with an intro video on the new digital PSAT. And then anybody who's rolling in a little bit late, they'll have a chance to catch up since this runs about 5 minutes. And then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. The digital PSAT and SAT, brought to you by Test Prep Gurus. The PSAT and SAT are changing from paper-based exams to digital adaptive exams. In this video, we'll unpack what that means for students. The digital PSAT will be released in America in the fall of 2023. The digital SAT will be released in March of 2024. Digital PSAT and SAT structure. The digital PSAT is 2 hours and 14 minutes. There are 2 section scores, verbal and math. Just like in the past, each section of the PSAT is scored on a scale of 160 to 760. The total possible score on the PSAT is 320 to 1520. The digital SAT is also 2 hours and 14 minutes. It also has 2 section scores, verbal and math. Each section of the digital SAT is scored on the familiar scale of 200 to 800. The total possible score is 400 to 1600. Each of the verbal and math sections is divided into 2 equal length modules. Students will first see Verbal Module 1. They will then advance to Verbal Module 2. This is followed by a 10-minute break. Students will then see Math Module 1, followed by Math Module 2. The verbal modules each contain 25 questions in 32 minutes. The math modules each contain 20 questions in 35 minutes. All modules contain an additional 2 pre-test questions that will not count towards your score. The digital PSAT and SAT are adaptive. Here's how it works in practice. In Module 1 of the verbal and math sections, students will see a variety of easy, medium, and hard questions. Depending on the student's performance in Module 1, they will advance to either an easier Module 2 or a harder Module 2. The scores of students who progress to the easier Module 2 will be capped. Only students who reach the harder Module 2 will be able to achieve the highest possible scores. The exact number of questions you will need to answer correctly on the first module to advance to the harder second module is not known, as it may vary depending on the test version and the scoring algorithm. However, early research suggests that you may need to answer at least 75% of the questions correctly on the first module to get a chance to see the harder questions on the second module. The exact score ranges for the easier and harder modules will also depend on the test version and the scoring algorithm of that particular exam. But our research suggests that students in the easier module will see scores between 200 and 650, while students in the harder module will see scores between 450 and 800. This is an important insight for 2 reasons. 1, students who advance to the easier second module can still achieve competitive scores. 2, for students who are aiming for the highest possible scores, their performance during the first module will be critical to their overall success. We would advise students to warm up before the official exam with some sample problems to make sure they are ready to perform when the official test begins. It's important to note that you will not know whether you've qualified for the easier or harder second module. The harder module will contain more difficult problems, but some easy ones as well. In light of this, our advice is to strive to reach the harder second module to maximize your score, but don't put undue stress on yourself to do so. A little bit of pressure to do well can help your performance, But freaking out over whether you qualified for the easier or harder second module can distract you from the task at hand. Do your best, answer as many questions correctly as possible in both modules, and see where the score lands. Verbal questions will test a variety of content areas: command of evidence, knowledge of high-utility words and phrases, ability to revise and edit writing, command of standard English, writing craft and structure, understanding information and ideas, standard English conventions, and expression of ideas. All of the verbal questions are multiple choice. Most questions have one short passage, and a relative few have a pair of short passages. Here's a sample verbal problem. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like to attempt the question on your own. The correct answer is D. Here's an explanation of why D is the best answer. The math questions on the digital PSAT and SAT will primarily test the following 4 content domains: algebra, advanced math, problem solving and data analysis, geometry, and trigonometry. Difficulty on both the math and verbal sections of the digital exams will range from 6th grade to college level material. 75% of questions on the math sections are multiple choice and 25% are student response questions. We are pleased to announce that the digital PSAT and SAT will both allow calculators on every single math question. You will have the option to use an approved personal calculator or take advantage of the built-in graphing calculator embedded in the software of the digital exam. Here's a sample math question. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like to attempt the question on your own. The correct answer is D. Here's an explanation of why D is the best answer. Many students find it useful to prepare for the PSAT and SAT as they would for any other test in school. The digital exams will offer the same range of accessibility options, including extended test time and breaks, text-to-speech, and/or speech-to-text. A paper-based version of the digital SAT or PSAT will be available for students who qualify for this accommodation. The process for requesting accommodations will remain the same. Families will need to contact their high school counselors to apply. Devices. Students will need to bring their own laptop or iPad to take the exam. They will also be allowed to use a school-owned desktop or laptop or a school-managed Chromebook. If you bring your own device, make sure to download the College Board software several days before the official PSAT or SAT. Don't forget to charge your device the night before and to bring a power cord with you to the school or testing center the day of the exam. Your device will need to remain powered on for 3 full hours, and depending on your test location, it may not be possible to charge your device the day of the exam. Like and subscribe for more free information about standardized testing, college admissions, and building life skills for college and beyond. Visit Test Prep Gurus if you'd like to sign up for a free mock ACT or SAT exam. It's often helpful to remember that standardized tests are not an indication of your intelligence, intellectual capacity, or future potential. They test verbal and mathematical fundamentals and can be prepared for like any other exam. In college admissions, they are one piece of the puzzle that help admissions officers make fair and transparent decisions by providing a common yardstick for all students. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. All right. So here's what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to go through that digital PSAT and SAT format. A lot of that was covered in the video, but we'll get a little more granular with that as we go. Then we're going to discuss, does testing still matter to colleges? And I added that specifically for the CDM webinar because there were a number of pre-webinar questions about that topic. So we're going to dig into that a bit. And Mrs. Russell has scheduled a follow-up presentation in December after all students receive their PSAT scores. And during that presentation, we will dissect what the scores mean, what you should do with your scores, what the next steps are, and then really dive into how colleges are using SAT, ACT, and PSAT scores as well in the college admissions process. But back to tonight, we'll then look at PSAT scholarships and the National Merit Scholarship and how one qualifies for those. And then we will wrap it up at the end with some actual digital PSAT questions. And parents and students alike are going to get to attempt a couple of questions. And I'll walk you through a few of the strategies that we are currently using to prepare students for the new digital adaptive PSAT. So don't miss that part at the end, because that's really going to be a high value ad where we do some actual test prep on this webinar. Okay, so just to recap, because I can't emphasize this stuff enough, have a checklist for the day of your digital PSAT. And I know this isn't the sexiest stuff to talk about. It's not that interesting, but make a checklist and then knock these things off, because there's going to be a learning process the first time this new digital test is delivered. Create that College Board account and download the Blue Book app onto the device you're going to use the day of the test before the day of the test. Fill out that registration, everything you need to do before the day of the test. Think carefully about the device you're going to use on test day. The bigger the screen, the better, in my opinion. A lot of laptops these days are on the smaller side. If you have one at your disposal that has a little bit bigger screen, that's going to really help you to navigate the test as you take it. And again, students have to bring their own device on the day of the test. Schools are providing whatever they have on hand for students to use, but I would highly recommend using a laptop that you are familiar with and that you've ideally tried a practice test on before. I would also say that you're going to be ahead of the curve if you bring your own graphing calculator on the day of the test. The new software does have a graphing calculator embedded in the software, which is useful and it's fine. It gets the job done. It's not nearly as fast or as effective as a graphing calculator that's in your hand. So go ahead, get a hold of one of those before you go take the test. Of course, you want to power up that device to a full charge before the day of the exam. Don't forget to bring a power cord just in case. If the power goes out during your exam, the software does shut down and saves your progress. So there's no need to freak out should there be some sort of emergency like that. I think that's just good to know, but bring that power cord, be prepared for anything that could go wrong. I think if something's going to go wrong, it's more likely to happen on this first administration of the new test. Remember that the PSAT and SAT are nearly identical exams, which increases the value of this PSAT. So I encourage all sophomore, junior families, sign up for it, take it whenever you can. This is really a free practice test, a dry run that doesn't count in the admissions process. And that's really useful to help you score higher eventually on the official SAT and ACT. And I did see a chat question here. If I'm a 9th grader, can I take the PSAT? Yes, you can. You can actually sign up for the 10th grade version of the PSAT, or you can go to the College Board website and you can use the search function on there for schools that are administering the 9th grade version of the PSAT, which is a little bit easier than the one that's used in 10th and 11th grade. I'd recommend that if you're a freshman. But if you just want to see how you're going to do on the 10th grade version, and that happens to be easier in terms of logistics, go for it. And then just to note that SAT essay has been completely removed. Do you have to take the digital PSAT this fall? Yes, you absolutely have to. There's no other choice. Unless you have accommodations due to some sort of learning difference, that's the only time when the paper-based version of the PSAT will be made available. It's fine if you want to take pictures and notes throughout the hour. You do not need to, though. We'll be more than happy to share the slides, share the recording of this presentation. There's going to be a lot of information tonight. And so try to just soak up as much as you can, and we will make all of this information available to you afterwards. You can take pictures if you want to, but you don't have to. Oh gosh, lots of questions coming in. You can and should take the PSAT in 10th grade and 11th grade if that's possible. You don't have to during 10th grade. And if it just doesn't work out, that's fine. But again, all of our research shows the more comfortable you are with the official test process, the higher your scores are. And so by taking the 10th grade PSAT, then the 11th grade PSAT, by the time you take an official SAT or ACT, you're just a little bit more comfortable with the process. And that tends to lead to a little bump in scores. And I like anything that leads to a little bump in scores. It doesn't require a lot of energy or time investment. Okay. Lots of questions tonight. This is an active crowd. I'm going to answer a lot of them as we go, and then I'm going to hit the questions at the end. Let's talk a little bit, and we're just going to get into, we're just going to scratch the surface tonight. We're just going to get a little bit into how colleges are using ACT and SAT, again, because there were so many pre-webinar questions about this. So we now live in the world of a test optional landscape. And what that means, we've got three options that in general that colleges take. They're test blind, which means they will not look at an SAT or an ACT score. Even if you send it to them, they're not going to use it in the admissions process. This is primarily the UC system and the Cal State system. There are a handful of other schools that won't look at scores if you send them, but it's a very small slice of the pie. Another small slice of the pie are schools that still require the SAT or the ACT. Georgetown, the Georgia State schools, the Florida State schools, MIT, the several of the military service academies, they still require an SAT or an ACT, but again, that's a small slice. The vast majority, over 91% of schools across the country are now test optional, which means you do not have to send them a test score. They will look at your application without one, and nearly all of them say they are not going to penalize students in the admissions process for not sending in a score. Now, I do want to unpack that language a little bit, not penalize a student. It is similar to AP scores and taking AP classes. They don't penalize students for not taking APs, but it is additive to your application, meaning they look favorably upon it. And that's often how they're now looking at SAT and ACT scores at test optional schools. So it's another piece of data to help them make a decision. And if it tends to be a strong score, then they tend to look upon that quite favorably. And we're going to dig into that a little bit further here. Now, we've got a handful of schools on the screen there that have made this data public. I wish every college made this information public, but they just haven't all done it. So we're looking at some selective schools here: Amherst, Boston, Colgate, Notre Dame, USC, Vanderbilt, Wellesley. The gray bars are the admission rates for students that applied without scores. The red bars are for the students who applied with scores. So if we look at Amherst, they had a 6% admission rate over the last 2 cycles of admission for students that didn't send in test scores. So they are still admitting students, albeit this is a very selective school. They are still admitting students who don't send in test scores. For students who did send them in, we see a 9% admission rate. And some of these schools have a much bigger difference. At Boston, we're going from 14% all the way to 25%. Colgate, a small liberal arts school, going from 12% to 25%. Notre Dame, 10 to 19. You can see the pattern there. But there are schools like Vanderbilt here where they're not putting as big of an emphasis on it, is what we draw from this data, where the difference is only moving from 6% to 7% with test scores. And so this does vary quite a bit from school to school. And so having a relationship with your counselor and asking questions about your specific target schools is a very smart idea in this new test optional environment. I do want to note one thing, one conclusion that people draw from this chart oftentimes. Let's look at Notre Dame, where we move from 10% to 19%. You're nearly, people sometimes think that that means they're doubling their chances by submitting an SAT or an ACT score. The caveat to this data is that students who are scoring below the typical ranges for these schools are often no longer sending in their scores. So this might skew how this appears. I don't think you're doubling your chances. What we can reasonably draw from this is that at these selective schools, that SAT or an ACT score is additive to your application. Again, everything in this process is optional, and now the test scores are as well. And if it is something that paints you in a good light and makes you look like a stronger applicant, then it behooves you to send in that score, put in the work to push that score as high as you can, reach your scoring potential, and then hopefully increase your chances at these selective schools. Now, everybody knows, and we said this in the video, everybody on the high school side and the college side, it's a well-known fact now that the SAT and ACT are not great indicators of your potential for the future. They are not intelligence tests. And I want to state that very clearly for a couple of reasons. One, when we take the judgment factor off of these exams, that takes a little bit of the pressure off of our kids. This tends to lead to slightly higher score increases. And I like anything that is good for kids' mental health and helps them score higher on these tests that can help them reach their target colleges more successfully. In light of this new knowledge that people have come to terms with, that does not mean that the SAT and ACT are not useful in the admissions process. And part of the reason for that is grade inflation. So you can see here that in the 90s, we had 39% of students across the country graduating with an A average. So that'd be between 3.8 and 4.0 or above a 4.0. This is now pulled up in 2021 all the way up to 55%. And from the data we just saw from the College Board in 2022, it's now north of 60% of students who plan to apply to college graduate with a 3.8 or higher. That's a lot of students with a lot of A's. And that makes it difficult for college admissions officers to differentiate between those students. And that's what has shifted emphasis back onto the SAT and ACT, where they always have a nice bell-shaped curve. And it's very difficult for students to score the highest possible scores on the ACT or the SAT. So it gives them another data point. And I think all of the research points to the fact that GPA is not perfect, because we all know that some teachers are easier than others. Some high schools are easier than others. And so GPA is not a perfect measurement, although it is the top measurement for colleges. And then that second measurement is going to be that SAT or ACT score. It's also not perfect, but it does shine a different light on a student. And when those two things are used in conjunction, college admissions officers know that that's the best indication of students' college GPAs, whether that's their freshman year or all the way 4 years through college. And it's also, when you use those two things together, a great predictor of graduation rates from college. And all of these things college admissions officers care about, they're aware of. And so that has brought scores back into the game here of college admissions. Scholarships. Don't forget the link between standardized tests and scholarships. And I'm just going to run through one of the three examples on screen here. This TCU example. This was in 2022, and we saw two students who really could not be more alike. They lived on the same street. They had grown up together, attended the same elementary school, middle school, private, high school. They had taken all the same classes, had the exact same GPA. They even looked alike. You would have thought they were twins if you didn't know any better. And they both applied to Texas Christian University. And it was really interesting because one applied without a score because she didn't want to go through the test prep process. And then one applied with a score because she thought it would help. Now, TCU is very explicit that they do not discriminate in terms of admissions on who gets in, whether or not you send in a score or don't send in a score. And true to their word, both students were admitted to TCU. The big difference, though, was the student who sent in a 31 on the ACT which is a strong score, but the ACT is on a 36-point scale. It's a long ways from a perfect score. She received a $112,000 scholarship. Those aren't loans. That's free money from the university, whereas the student who did not submit the scores has to pay full sticker price. This is a big deal for obvious reasons. I mean, college is really, really expensive these days, and we're talking big money here. And I like to see kids graduate from college debt-free, and a strong SAT or ACT score combined with strong grades is a great way to do that. Okay, and then finally, what is a good score? This always is asked every single webinar, and we're really firm believers in this idea that there are no good or bad scores. There are only scores that will help you reach your goals for college. For all the parents on the call, I doubt your SAT score ever got you so much as a cup of coffee, let alone helped you to make a mortgage payment at some point. The scores are stepping stones to reach scholarships and better your odds to get into selective colleges. And that's it. We have put together a flyer here, and I am going to share that with everybody right now. You can click that download button if you would like to see that. And what this shows, you can see the close-up of this little section here on the left. You can see the close-up on the right. We've got the 100 most applied to colleges, and then the SAT range and the ACT range, along with the admission rate of those schools. And those score ranges are for students who are admitted to those schools. And so the way that you can use this flyer is if you have target colleges that are on this list, you can look them up and see where you ideally would want to be in order to be a competitive applicant at that school. If you score higher than that range, that's when they're going to start throwing the merit-based scholarships at you to try to entice you to come there. And if we, for an example, if we were looking at, say, Pomona College, they've got an SAT range of 1,400 to 1,540. So if you scored at the upper end of that range, or even a little bit higher, you're going to be a competitive applicant at Pomona. Now, if you also happen to apply to, let's say, Redlands University, you'd be well above the high end of their SAT school. Well, Redlands knows with that high SAT score that schools like Pomona are going to be looking at you. So Redlands is going to change your financial package when they send you your admission of offer to make it very attractive for you to come to Redlands. And the way they're going to do that is to make it less expensive than it would be to go to Pomona. And so that's part of this game of college admissions. And another reason that we want to have a list of colleges that we apply to that fall into three buckets. We want to have reach schools that are going to be hard to get into, target schools where we fit right in the mix and we're very competitive, and then some likely schools, or sometimes referred to as safety schools, but I feel like there's a negative connotation around safety school. So a likely school where your scores and grades are above what's typical for that college. Those are the schools that are going to be likely to offer you big financial aid packages. And you never know. If you visit those schools and check them out, that might be the right fit school for you. Try not to get caught up in the rankings. Rankings really are an illusion and a status symbol. You want to find the right fit school for you that has the programs, the environment, the location that's going to help you take the next step towards becoming the person you want to be in the future. And so I really like to say, start with that. Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? How do you want to affect the world? Then you start to ask what colleges would help you get there. Then you come down to what scores and grades do I need to be competitive at those schools? And that's a very big difference in the process as opposed to how most people do it, which is I'm just going to push my grades and scores as high as I can and see what the highest ranked schools I can get into. I think the right fit approach is a much healthier one, and you'll be more successful in the process if you approach this process that way. Okay, timelines, and we were right on time. I'm moving quickly because we want to get through those problems at the end, but I do want to talk about timelines. So the standard timeline, and this used to be much more common years ago, and I think this is still a healthy timeline based on student development, is that in 11th grade, you would use your PSAT score and a practice ACT score to determine whether you're a little bit better at SAT or ACT. And no college wants you to send both an SAT and an ACT. They just want to see the best score you can put forward on either test. No college puts a preference on either one. It hasn't been that way for more than a decade. And so you just want to figure out which one you're a little bit better at and run with that test. So you would choose SAT or ACT for a spring exam, take that exam in spring of your junior year, and then in 12th grade, refine the college list, refine your scoring goals, and possibly retest if needed. You would take an SAT or an ACT in the summer or in the early fall of your senior year. And then you can see the early action, early decision deadlines there down below at the bottom of your screen. October or September is when you would need to take your last SAT or ACT to hit those early action deadlines. And then for regular decision, you could extend that testing all the way into December. Now, what has become much more common is this accelerated timeline. And I would like to take a moment to say that even though this has become much more common, this really isn't for everyone. And the accelerated timeline really should be driven by the student and not the parents. There should be a good reason for this. These students should naturally be scoring very high on their 10th grade PSAT before they start looking this accelerated timeline. I'm going to walk you through it here. So this would be students that are taking mock SATs and ACTs the summer before 10th grade, and then prepping for SAT or ACT during that summer. I'm sorry, the summer after 10th grade. And then in 11th grade, they're taking an SAT or an ACT in the early fall because they just prep for it over the summer. And then they take a spring ACT or SAT. And usually this comes with an express goal of having everything finished by the end of 11th grade. There are athletes and certain special admission cases that have to be on this timeline. If that's the case, fine. Again, I really think this should differ from student to student. It depends on the classes you're taking. It depends on your overall development. In general, the girls mature faster than the boys do. They seem ready for this accelerated timeline more often than the boys are because they're getting into it so early. Personally, I like this. If you're really fired up to take care of your testing, I like this balanced timeline a little bit better. You would have a conversation with your counselor. Our firm is always happy to answer the phone, answer an email, and talk to you we don't charge for any of this, just to give you a free consultation to talk you through SAT versus ACT and to put together a testing timeline. So that summer after 10th grade, you could take your mock ACT, compare it to your PSAT score, put a plan in place, and not necessarily have to rush into anything prematurely. If you want to prep for that PSAT because you think you might be eligible for the national merit, that can be arranged. But you're really looking at an official test in December, maybe early spring of your junior year, and then another one at the end of the spring of your junior year. And hopefully that's the last time. But you know that you've got the backup date in the summer before 12th grade or that early fall 12th grade test if you need to fall back on that, because we've got a lot of brain development that happens from 10th to 11th grade and certainly from 11th to 12th grade. And then finally, no two testing plans should be the same. And so again, we really pride ourselves on helping as many families as we can through this process. And so whether you're signing up for paid services or not, we're happy to have a consultation with you to walk you through steps that you can take to make the most of this testing process. Now, for my class of 2025 families, I just wanted to cap this real quick because there are a lot of you on here tonight. And for those folks, you're going to take this digital PSAT in October. If you haven't already done so, I would go ahead and take that mock ACT. And I will put, you can see the link on your screen there, but I also put up a clickable one on the screen there. If you need to sign up for a mock ACT, again, we do that free of charge. We're here to help. And so we will do those mock ACTs free of charge. Happy to do that. help you choose between ACT or SAT. And then we should get a testing plan in place. It's not too late. There's no need to freak out if you haven't done any of this. But we do want to get a testing plan in place. And then you can take steps to execute that plan, whether that's in doing self-prep. There's some great self-prep tools out there these days, whether it's in a classroom course or one-on-one preparation, which tends to be the most effective. And then last thought here is we choose between SAT and ACT. And I will have more information about this in the presentation that we do after you receive your PSAT scores. The ACT is not changing anything. It's going to remain paper-based. And I thought this was really interesting. This just came out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. They looked at students taking a paper-based test versus a digital one on a year-end state-administered test. And their conclusion was that students who took the online test performed as if they'd had 5 fewer months of academic preparation in math and 11 fewer months of preparation in English than their peers who took the test on paper. Now, this is going to apply to some students more than others, but if you're a student that prefers the paper exam, then ACT is probably going to be a better bet for you in the future here. ACT is toying with a digital version of their test, but again, most students do better on a paper-based version of an exam. It's easier to read paper than it is words on a screen. That is the running theory that Harvard came up with, because we tend to scan things on a screen as opposed to really read them like we do on paper. And so this is just one thing to consider. A lot of students are going to be fired up to take the digital SAT when the time comes to choose between the two, simply because that new SAT is going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes instead of 3 hours like the ACT. I would say an extra 45 minutes of testing shouldn't be the primary reason that you choose one test or the other. Take one of each and let the scores decide which one is better for you. And I think a question just popped up on based on grades in certain classes, should I take SAT or ACT? The results, the data, they all show us that there is no easy shortcut to figure out if you're better at SAT or ACT. The best way to do it is take that PSAT, then take a mock ACT, and let the scores indicate which one you're a little bit better at, and then go with that test. Okay, National Merit Scholarships. I'm not going to play the video here just to save us a little time. I'll just hit the highlights. National Merit Scholarship can only be earned during your junior year. It is very difficult to win the National Merit Scholarship or even become a semifinalist. As you can see in the pie chart here, 1.6 million students approximately take the PSAT every year. Only 16,000 of them will be named semifinalists. It is a state-by-state competition. And what that means is you have to score much higher in a high population state like California. We are projecting that the national merit cutoff score will be 221 for this coming year. The PSAT qualification is determined by something called the national, your index score, the National Merit Scholarship Selection Index score. It's quite a mouthful. And in the follow-up presentation, we'll talk about how that is calculated. All you need to know is you're going to see it on your score report. And in terms of the selection index score for this National Merit Scholarship, your verbal scores count twice as much as your math scores when they determine if you're qualifying for a National Merit Scholarship. Now, ramifications of the scholarship. This is the important part regarding the scholarship. It's only $2,500, which is a small scholarship in terms of what is on offer from different colleges. The reason it's so coveted is that it does help in the admissions process, and a number of schools will automatically send you a merit-based award if you were a national semifinalist for national merit or a finalist or you won one. Boston is a great example of that. They offer an automatic $25,000 per year scholarship for anyone that's a PSAT semifinalist. So when you apply, you'll qualify for that $25,000 scholarship. Now, here's the key part, though. if you don't hit that 221, which is very, very difficult to hit, it's fewer than 1% of PSAT test takers reach a qualifying score for national merit. You still have just as many opportunities to win those same scholarships. They might be under different names, but if you score an equivalent score on the SAT or on the ACT, those same schools that offer these PSAT-based scholarships will also offer them based on your SAT or ACT score. So we had a couple of kids who scored a 220 last year. They were right on the cusp of national merit semifinalists and didn't quite get it. And they were really heartbroken over that. They did a little bit of prep work, got that score up a little bit higher, and then earned equivalent amounts in terms of scholarships with their SAT and ACT scores. And so again, think of the PSAT as a practice test. If you happen to hit national merit, that's just a bonus. It's a gold star for doing so well. But your real emphasis should be on the SAT and the ACT, and don't put too much pressure on yourself for the PSAT. Now, our interface on the new digital test. Do know that you can cross off answers over here on the right-hand side. And I would encourage everybody to take a practice PSAT test. Again, you can contact us. We'll set you up with that prior to your official PSAT, just so you can fiddle with the software and get used to how you interface with the questions. You can also highlight. There is a highlight function. You can see we've got a little highlight on the screen there. And then you can take notes down in this bottom section. And that is really important for the verbal questions. And when we run through some examples in a second, I will show you why that note section, that annotation section is so important. Okay. We've got a little bit of time left. Let's go through a couple of questions. Your PSAT will be in October there, Gabe. And you should be able to sign up for that through your counseling office at CDM. And that's the best way to approach that process. So contact your counselor, ask about registration if you haven't already registered. No, Andrea, you don't need to study for the mock test before taking it. I actually think ideally in 10th grade, we'd have a dry run at the PSAT and then a dry run at a mock ACT, just to see where the student is naturally scoring. Again, those scores aren't going to follow you around for the rest of your life. And so they're just a baseline to let us know where you're at naturally. And I think a natural score without doing a bunch of studying is best. But if you're really fired up to do a little prep beforehand, that's okay too. Okay, let's look at this question on your screen, and I will run through some of the questions in the chat here while you guys do this. Go ahead, and I'm going to put that poll up on the screen. Why don't you take a shot at this question and let me know what you think the answer is. All right. We got some A's, B's, and C's in there. Nobody's going D yet. I'll give you a couple more seconds to analyze it. All right, feel free to keep chatting in answers while we look at this. So I would absolutely use the highlighter on every single verbal question. And by the way, we are going to concentrate on the verbal questions tonight. And here's the reason why. The math questions on the digital PSAT are very much the same as they used to be. You're not going to see anything unfamiliar in terms of the math and the way that it's structured. Key things there, you're going to have note paper to write your scratch paper to write your notes on, and then bring a calculator. And those test questions haven't changed a whole lot. The verbal questions have changed in a whole lot of ways. And so that's what we're going to focus on tonight, because I think that's where you'll get the most value. Plus, again, for that National Merit Scholarship, again, the verbal scores are worth twice as much. So in 1930, Japanese American artist. And whenever you see a proper name, especially an obscure one, I want you to just take the initials. So in my head, I'm just going Japanese American artist, CO. I don't waste any energy, um, any mental energy on trying to figure out how to say that name, who that person is. It's not going to matter. I just need to identify that it is the artist. So that's CO, depicted the natural beauty of Yosemite National Park in 2 memorable woodcuts. Evening at Carlin. And again, these proper names of the artworks don't matter. What I highlighted there was that there were 2 of them. And on any grammar-based questions, I'm going to look at the answers first. And so I go, okay, it was, they were, this was, some were. So if I'm looking at the answers first, I can see it's it, they, this, some. So we've got singular versus plural, and then was, were. Okay, so then we need to get that to agree with our singular versus plural. In 2019, the blank exhibited alongside 150 of the same artist's other works, and that's really all the most important information I need there. Now, because I highlighted 2 memorable woodcuts and I know I'm testing singular versus plural, right away, I'm going to say, oh, there are 2 of them. I can get rid of it and this because those are singular. And then I'm down to they and some. I've quickly narrowed it down to 2 answer choices. And in this case, some doesn't really make sense because there are only 2 of them. So you can't have some of them. It's either 1 or 2. So my correct answer is going to be B, and congratulations to a whole bunch of you who got that correct. If you didn't, don't worry about it. That's why you're here. It's all about learning. And you learn more on the questions that you miss than the ones you get right. All right, let's try another one. I'll throw a new poll up there, but this time I'm not going to let you see everybody else's answers. You have to choose for yourself. And again, it's a grammar question. So I would say go to the answers first, then read the question. Ooh, people are a little more careful this time when they can't see everybody else's answers. Now, if you're stuck, I'll help you along here a little bit. So again, November of 1934, usually those dates, I'm going to fly right by them because it's not going to be critical information to what they're testing. This is clearly a grammar question. It's furthermore versus indeed versus therefore versus still. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? So we're talking grammar. They're not going to test me on dates and proper names. ASG was living in what must have seemed like the ideal city for a young artist's parents, Paris. And I'm going to key on must have seemed like, because it almost seems like something's hidden in that. And so I'm going to highlight that to just make sure as I read through the rest of the question, I can come back to that easily. She was studying firsthand the color saturated style of France's modernist masters and beginning to make a name for herself as a painter. Well, that sounds good. Blank SG longed to return to her childhood home of India. Well, I thought everything was great in Paris. What must have seemed like the ideal city for a young artist. Okay, so I need something that's going to take this in a new direction if she longed to return to her childhood home of India. So when I look at these, furthermore doesn't change the direction of the sentence. Indeed doesn't change it. Therefore doesn't change it. So I'm getting rid of those and I'm left with still. And still is going to be my correct answer there, D. And then one other little tip on a question like this. If this happened to come at the end and I was running out of time and it was a grammar question, I might notice, and this is why only on the grammar questions do I go to the answers first. Furthermore, indeed, therefore, these are very similar answer choices and they keep the sentence going in the same direction. Whereas still would be there's going to be some type of exception to whatever's being talked about. And we call that a sentence shifter. You can see my arrow there. It's going in a new direction. And so even without looking at the question, I could identify what is likely the correct answer just by identifying that 3 answers are very similar and one of them is not like the others. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more complicated. Now, what I'm going to suggest when you see a question that says, and you'll notice I covered up the answer choices there. This is basically a sentence completion. The SAT is calling them words in context, but in a version, we'll call it version 2.0 of the SAT, which existed 15 years ago, they used to have sentence completions. And so we do have strategies for these types of questions. The way that they trick you on a question like this is with the answer choices. They think you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to plug all of these words into that blank and see which one sounds the best, which is a bad idea because that is how they're going to trick you, or you're going to read the question and then plug in all the answers and see which one sounds the best. In either case, it's the answer choices they're going to use to trip you up. So what we strongly recommend on these, we refer to them as sentence completions, but the words in context questions, is to not look at the answers first. And I'm going to put this up here. Actually, we're going to use the chat. I'm going to switch over to the chat. I want everybody to fill in their own word for the blank. Whatever seems to you to make sense. What would you put in for your own word into that blank? Whoops, I just put up mine. Andrea, you're skipping ahead. Okay. Since we're a little nervous here. Oh, there we go. Now we're getting some answers. Gives back, helps, good. And the thing I highlighted here was engaging in a mutually beneficial relationship. You'll notice habitats with limited nutrients. Okay, that doesn't, certain fungus species will grow. I'm not in the meat of the sentence yet. Mutual beneficial relationship. That, when you've gone through enough of these questions, you're going to recognize the part of the sentence that might modify the next sentence. And that's usually the key to answering the question. Big word here. I have no idea how to say it. I don't need to, and I'm not going to spend any mental energy on it. In this symbiotic exchange, which if you know what symbiotic means, you would know that it means mutually beneficial. But even if you didn't, hopefully you highlighted mutually beneficial relationships, and then you can keep moving forward from there. So the tree provides the fungus with carbon, a nutrient necessary for both species, and the fungus probably provides something in return. Oh, okay, it helps the tree's ability to absorb nitrogen. I'm going to put in the word helps. And then only once I have my own word, and gives back, contributes, assists, these are all great answers. What I'm going to do then is match up my word with their words. The one that matches up best is, and again, that's where you're going to do this in this annotation section when you're in the actual software. I want you to actually type in helps, assists, benefits. And I know sometimes you're going to look at these questions and say, it'd just be easier to just do it without typing my own word in. It will on the easier ones, but on the hard ones, you're going to be much better off, much more likely to get the hard questions correct if you type in your own word, then match them up with the answer choices. And we want to get the hard ones. Hopefully we get all the easy ones right, but we want to make a habit of doing it the right way. So when we get to the hard ones, it's just automatic. Now, if I'm using the word helps, I'm going to match this up. Help does not match with overreacts, retaliates, or deviates. Hopefully I know a lot of these words, and vocab lists are going to come back with the new digital SAT. They've gone out of fashion the last couple of years, but they're going to be back in fashion because the SAT has prioritized vocabulary again. And hopefully we know that helps is very similar to reciprocates. In fact, reciprocate is a great way to describe a relationship where two people, or in this case, a fungus and a tree, help each other. So that's a reciprocal relationship. But even if you didn't know what the word reciprocate means, you probably know overreact. You probably remember retaliate means to do something back to somebody. Maybe you don't know deviate, but if you get it down to two, hopefully you can make an educated guess at that point and get down to reciprocate. Either way, the harder the question, the more important it is to come up with your own word first. And I know, again, I've taught it to back in the day in the former version of the SAT, because this is the fourth time in 20 years they've revamped the test. Students were always resistant to this strategy, and yet once they embraced it, their scores would go up. So I can't encourage you to do that enough. Okay, now let's get a little crazier. So when we see something like this, when it says which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the test, we're not talking grammar here. We're talking understanding the ideas that are in there. And so what I want to do is really focus. It told me to really look at the second sentence in the overall structure. I'm going to highlight that second sentence. Then I'm going to describe it in that annotation box in my own words before I go to the answers. So again, let's see if everybody here, just in their own words, could describe the function of the second sentence. Go ahead, put that into the chat, and I will also put a poll up so you can add in your answer when the time comes. But first, I want to see your actual sentences that you come up with. I'll give you some hints there with some highlights. They're confident that the B star, will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. Maybe I don't know what a supernova is, but I know what it means for a star to explode. They're much less confident, however, about when this will happen. Oh, since that depends on internal characteristics of the B star that are largely unknown. Okay, so they're really confident about one thing, but then they're much less confident about when it's going to happen. There are some unknowns. And then as I keep moving through this, they concluded that this method could not sufficiently reveal when this is going to happen. So I came up and from a previous webinar, somebody said they know what, but not when. And I liked that answer. Issues in the research was the one that I came up with. Counteracts their overall confidence of the explosion. And that's really good. You'll notice mine are a little bit more simple. Remember, nobody's reading your notes. Nobody's going to see your annotations. Write it in short, succinct. It's just a note to yourself. So it doesn't need to be a full sentence. We don't need proper grammar or punctuation. Issues in the research, nice and to the point. You could even just say issues in research. Know what, but not when. Again, that was a student response that I thought was really nice, quick and to the point, because we don't want to waste time writing a sentence. We just need to put a note so that we're not tricked by the answers. Now, when we open this up, let's see which one of these 4 answers matches with issues in the research, or they know what, but not when, or broadcasting a problem, issue. And your poll is up there so you can answer A, B, C, or D. Oh, nice. We've got a little discrepancy on which one might be the right answer. Nice. This one's a little tougher. You can see this one's a little tougher. And this, again, these are where you want to take the time to write out your own answer and then match it with the answer choices. The harder test questions are designed to trick students. That's how they filter out the higher scoring ones from the lower scoring ones. But if we work around these tricks, we're going to do better on the exam and raise our scores. And I promise, if you practice this technique, you will become just as fast, if not faster, at coming up with your own answer and matching it than the time it takes to plug all of those answers in or match that up with your highlights. You'll actually become faster. Maybe not right away, but with practice, you'll become faster at it and you won't get tricked as often. Now, if I'm looking at this, explains how the work of Nance and colleagues was received by others in the field. No, it doesn't sound like that at all. Presents the central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. No, that's not the purpose of the second sentence at all. Identifies the problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve, but did not. Now that does sound like issues in the research, or when the kids said they know what, but not when, that is a problem. And then D, it describes a serious limitation of the method used by Nance and colleagues. That actually also sounds pretty good. So now I'm down to C and D, and I've got to figure it out. But something here jumps out at me, which is the word method used by Nance and colleagues. there's no description of, I didn't ever write the word method. That didn't jump out at me when I wrote my own answer. And that should help me get back to C, which is really that it was about a problem. And our correct answer is C. All right, we are at 7 o'clock. I have one more of these, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip it to respect everybody's time. I will, for anybody that we're going to fly through that one, and we're going to fly through this. We're going to save all that for our follow-up presentation because I don't want to go over time here. What I can do, though, I do have a video of one of our instructors going through a number of questions and giving you some more tips and strategies. And for anybody that goes to this link, or if you signed up for a mock ACT or SAT earlier, you can scan that barcode with your phone, or you can go to this link and we will send you the slides from the presentation. I'll send you a link to that video where that tutor goes through more questions. Of course, if you need a mock test, that is doable too. And featured action. Yeah, and you can just scan that with your phone right off the screen, or you can just type in prepgurus.com/updates. Oh, here it is. There we go. And I'll put that back up on the screen for anybody that wants to click that link. That'll take you right to the website, and you can fill in your info there. We, of course, do one-on-one and classroom prep. We'll do it in home, in office, or virtually, whatever fits your lifestyle and your learning style. And we do free tests and consultations. And then you can connect with us on Instagram with @TestPrepGurus, where we put a lot of free content up on there for families to consume, again, to just educate you over the course of this process. And one of the great things that we have developed in recent years when families sign up for mock tests is if we have your graduation year, we can also send you information based on where you're at in the process. So you're not just getting educational emails that are sent to everyone. You're getting the right information at the right time during freshman year, during sophomore year, during junior year, during senior year, to make sure that you're on track and taking the appropriate steps at the right time, because we want to see everybody succeed in this process. You've got our website up there, and you've got the address up on the screen for the new podcast, which has been successful beyond our wildest dreams so far. We've only got 3 episodes up. One on college admissions, one on earning scholarships and financial aid, and then one is an interview with an elite athlete who holds the world record for the fastest swim from Catalina to Long Beach, over 20 miles. And he is quite a character, if I don't say so myself. And people have really enjoyed the podcast, and they're learning a lot. And we'll have a new episode every single month to help educate all of our many fans on the college admissions process, along with just exposing them to interesting individuals. And let me close this by saying, I want to remind everybody, the SAT and the ACT are not assessments. They're opportunities. They're opportunities to win scholarships, gain access to selective colleges, build, when you prep for them, to build skills in the areas that are tested on the test. Prepped properly, you should learn to read and write you should learn to read for a higher level of retention at a faster speed. Your writing should improve with the grammar studying that you do. Your math class grades should go up as a result of studying the math on these tests. And then if it's the ACT, there's a lot of visual data that's tested on the science section. And it's a great skill to develop. The science section, it's usually the hardest section for students when they first take it, but we see the biggest improvements. And I think it builds it's the section that lends itself most readily to building skills for the rest of your life, because being able to understand statistics and information that's presented in charts and graphs is a very important skill. Okay, and then my last thing I'm going to throw up on the screen here before I answer questions, I'm just going to ask people to rate the webinar, and so that is up on the screen. And then I am going to look in the chat for questions that have not been answered. Approximately how many questions can you miss and still qualify as a National Merit semifinalist? I wish there was a direct answer to that question. The answer is not many, but it does vary from test to test. And when you sit down to take that test in October, the students sitting next to you will not be taking the same questions in the same order. And so one of the benefits of that is that it's going to be much, much more difficult to cheat on the new digital tests. The downside of that is you don't get as much information back on the score report, and it's going to be tougher to tease out. You don't get to see which questions you answered correctly, which ones you missed. And so to get exact numbers on this, it's going to take us probably 1 or 2 cycles of going through PSAT scores to give you the exact numbers on that. What I can tell you is we will crunch the numbers and we will find out. And next year, we're going to have that information for you much more directly. I do also want to note, if you don't worry about ending up on the easier or the harder module 2 when you're taking the PSAT, you're only going to freak yourself out by worrying about it. And it doesn't really matter. You're in whatever module you're in. The harder module 2 has easy questions on it. And we don't necessarily know what order they're going to be in. So there is no way to determine it midsection. By worrying about it, all you're doing is wasting mental energy and wasting time. And do remember, this is a time-intensive test. We do not want to circle the drain over which module we got in, and we don't want to circle the drain over any particular question that might be giving us trouble. So if you see one and it just looks like a nightmare, or you've already spent 30 or 40 seconds on it and you're just not getting anywhere, mark it for review for later. Go through the rest of the test. When you bring a watch to the testing center and see that you only have a few minutes left, then you go back to the ones you marked for review. Guess on every single question. If you, there is no guessing penalty on the SAT or the ACT, so you do want to make sure you guess on every single question. And hopefully you have time to go back through those ones that have been marked for review and do your best on them. Yeah, now that's a heck of a question. Is 9th grade GPA included when people look at you for admissions? The answer is it depends, as so much in college admissions. And I'm going to let Mrs. Russell dive into this one further. But what I can tell you is selective colleges have a way of viewing your GPA through multiple lenses. And so with a click of a button, they can see your weighted GPA, your unweighted GPA. They can see your grades from 10th through 12th grade, weighted and unweighted. They can usually also see them with freshman grades, without. So some schools, and you can see it on their website, will say, we really do not prioritize freshman grades. Some schools, like the Ivies, they really like to see you have straight A's from the get-go. But the Ivies these days is really a lottery for every student, even with a 5.9 GPA and a perfect SAT score. It's still a reach for those students. And even if they invented a new shade of blue and recently cured a rare form of cancer, it's a reach. The Ivies have gotten so competitive, it's crazy. So make sure you have a balanced list. Don't overstress about your freshman grades. Do your best in those classes. Without a doubt, I can say this: the older you get, the more important the grades are in the process. So your sophomore grades are definitely going to be more important than your freshman grades, if they count, if those freshman grades count at all. And then your junior grades are going to be more important than your sophomore grades. And depending on when you apply and when your transcript is sent, that first semester of senior year will be the most important of all. So do your best. And as you get older, grades count a little bit more. So many questions. And if I don't get to some, because there is no way I will get through all of these, I will, somebody from our staff will email you to answer those questions. And Donald, thank you so much for going through and answering quite a few of these. You've done a great job tonight. I know everybody appreciates that. All right, I'm going to try to get to how many SAT dates are there. If you go to the Prep Gurus website and scroll to the bottom and hit resources, you will find the SAT dates listed for you for both SAT and ACT. There's a downloadable flyer on there for that. So again, that you just go to the Prep Gurus website, scroll to the bottom and click the resources button, and you can see when those tests are. And you can also go to the SAT and ACT websites to see that information. Okay. And if you do have more questions, contact us through the website. Just you can go to prepgurus.com or testprepgurus.com. Click that free mock ACT or SAT button, and then just type in your question in the message section. We're more than happy to answer any follow-up questions because we had a lot of people on the webinar tonight and a lot of questions, and we want to answer all of those for you when we can. So it is 7:12. So I'm going to say thank you so much. You were a fantastic audience, and I love the enthusiasm. I love all the questions. I love that you did some SAT problems tonight. That takes energy, and I appreciate you. So have an excellent night. I hope to see all of you CDM families in person in December when we look at your actual PSAT scores and then the next steps on what we're going to do with those. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being you.